Specflow tutorial part 7 hooks part 2. In part 6 we have learned about a before feature, after feature, before test and after test hooks. So in this session we are going to learn about a before scenario, after scenario, before test and after test. So let me start this session. So let me flip to Visual Studio to understand with an example. So we have this Specflow session project, and this Specflow session project we have created in the previous session. So this Specflow session project is having a few of the naked packages. One is a Specflow NUnit. So this Specflow session project is using a unit test provider, which is the NUnit. When we talk about the feature files, it is having one feature file, which is this login.feature file, and all these steps, whatever the steps which we have written it, those have a corresponding step definitions here inside this web step. And if you talk about other hooks, we have already created one class, that is a runner class, and inside the runner class we have added the before test, before feature, and after test run. So we have added all these hooks in the previous sessions. Now, so in this session we are going to talk about a before scenario, after scenario, before step and the after step, and what is the utilization and why do we use these hooks. So let's do one thing. Let's go it here inside this web step, and we can add a one method here. We are saying public, this is going to be the void. We can say before scenario. Here we need to add a tag. That tag is going to be the before scenarios. So with the help of this particular tag, this before scenario method will be executed whenever we are going to execute any of the scenario. If we have 10 scenarios in the feature file, then this before scenario will be executed 10 times. And if we have 2 feature files, and in that 2 feature files we have a 20 scenario, then this before scenario method will be executed 20 times, because whenever we are going to start our scenario, this before scenario will be executed. Now the question is, what we are going to add it here inside this before scenario. So we can save the information related to a scenario, and now the question comes up, how are we getting the information related to a scenario? As an parameter, what we are going to do is we are going to add a scenario context. So this scenario context exists inside the tech.specflow namespace. So this scenario context is similar to the feature context, but this scenario context is having a different methods, and these methods are going to help us to get the information related to a scenario. So let's have this. We can say sc, and when we commit here, so let's commit here, we can say console dot write line, and here is the sc dot. It is having a different methods and a properties, and one property is related to a scenario info. So this scenario info, so it is having a different methods and a properties. We have the description. We can get the description of the scenario. We can get the title of the scenario with the help of this title property, and we are also going to use a tags property to get all the tags of that particular scenario. So in this way we can have the information, and we can use, or we can save the information related to a scenario to have it, the information inside a different reports which we are going to generate it. We can also create the object of the WebDriver. So we can say we are going to create the object of WebDriver. So whenever we execute a scenario, what we need the object of the driver. So the reason is, whenever we are going to start our scenario, we need to have a separate browser, because each scenario we are going to execute on a new instance of the driver, new instance of the browser. So here, whenever we are saying before scenario, we are going to create a new browser here as well. So another thing is important. So we can use a scenario context. So this scenario context object will be created with the help of the dependency injection. It's a responsibility of the Specflow to create the object and send it here. Now we have a feature context here. Yes, we can have the feature context here as a parameter inside this before scenario, because the feature context already created. Whenever we start the feature file, the object of the feature context is created. Another hook, if we talk about with respect to this before scenario, we have this after scenario as well. So let's create a method, and let's add a tag here. We can say this is after scenario. So this after scenario method will be called, or you can say will be invoked, whenever we are done with the execution of the scenario. So for each scenario, this method will be called. So after completing the execution of the scenario, this method will be invoked. Now the question is what all information we are going to save it here. After execution the scenario, what we are going to do is we are going to close the browser, because for each scenario we are going to have a new browser. So here inside this after scenario we can close the browser, and then in the before scenario we are going to invoke a browser as well. So take an example of, we have already a iWebDriver right now, we have added it here inside the constructor of the WebStep class. So we can call that iDriver, have the close as well as we have the quit as well. So let's use the quit, and whenever we are going to move to the before scenario or the constructor of the class, we are going to create the object. So we can have another important part related to a report. So inside this after scenario we can create or we can group a different type of the reports. So we are going to learn all of them in a detail whenever we are going to go and create the automation framework. Now we have the before scenario, we have the after scenario, we have another hook. It's a public void, we have the before step. So whenever we are going to execute our step, this before step will be executed. We need to add a tag. So here is the before step. So whenever you are executing any step of the scenario, then that, or you can say then this method will be called. So if you talk about the steps, so this is the scenario, and if you talk about the steps, this is a one step, this is a second step. It means if you talk about a particular before step, so it is going to invoke around 5 times. So whatever the steps which we have it exist in the scenario, it means that step will be invoked. Here we can also have the information related to a scenario context. We can have the SC as well. We can save the information of steps here inside this particular before step. We have another one that is saying, we are saying after step. So if talk about after step, this after step will be invoked after executing a particular step. Let's have this here after step tag. So this after step method will be invoked after executing a particular step. Now the question comes up, what all things we can do it here inside this after step. So inside the after step, suppose you are executing a scenario and one of the step of the scenario is getting it failed. What you need the screenshot of that particular page. It means after executing a particular step, we need to take the screenshot. So we are saying we are going to take the screenshot of the failed steps, and we are going to attach those screenshots to the reports. Have this here, we can say scenario context and SC here. So how we guys can take the screenshot, or how can we know that the particular scenario is getting it failed? For that we have this if sc dot test error. So this test error property help us to get it whether our scenario is getting it failed or not. If it is not equal to null, it means our scenario is getting some error, or you can say the test step is having some error. At that point of time we are going to take the screenshots. Now the question is, how can we take the screenshots? So we have the I take screenshot is an interface. What we need to cast this particular driver, and then we can use dot, and here is a get screenshot. So get screenshot is a method, and inside the get screenshot method, and then we have another property. So this property is saying as base 64 encoded string. So whenever you want to attach a screenshot to the HTML at that point of time, you need to take as a base 64 encoded string, and whenever you add this particular string to the HTML, automatically HTML is going to render that particular screenshot for you. You don't need to take a screenshot in the JPG, in the PNG, and then you need to attach it. Whenever you are going to add this particular string, which is this as a base 64 encoded string, it is going to display the screenshot in the HTML. So we can say we are going to take these screenshots. So let's have this, we can say base 64 here, and then we can use this particular base 64. Here we can say we are going to take the screenshot of the step, and then we can attach it to the HTML. So let's have a checkpoint here, and then we are going to invoke this. Let's have a message here. So we can say console dot write line, and inside the write line we can say before step. And then we are going to commit here, so we can also have a checkpoint here. So let's have a checkpoint here. So now if we go and invoke this, so whenever we want to invoke it, we need to go to the test explorer, and let's have a build here. Select this and say debug. So it has opened this particular browser, and the control comes it here inside this before scenario. And if we hover a mouse on the feature context, we can see we have the object of the feature context, as well as we are getting the title of the scenario as well, which is this login with valid credentials. So if we go and click on continue, so we have reached it here inside this before step. So before executing any of the step, we are going to commit here inside the before step. And if we commit here on this particular browser, we can see still there is no navigation to any of the site. So click on continue, and the control comes it here inside this. So we have came it here again. I think we need to put a checkpoint here. So let's have a checkpoint and then click on continue. The control comes it inside this after step, and when we hover a mouse here, we can see right now test error is equal to null. The reason is we don't have any error inside this particular scenario. So whenever we are getting any error in the scenario, then this particular test error, which is a part of the scenario context, is going to get us some value. So now let's get rid of all these breakpoints here, and let's click on continue. And if we commit here, we have logged in inside this particular swag lab, and the control comes it here inside this after scenario. When we click on continue, control has reached it here inside this after test run, and the browser also closed it. So let's click on continue. So when we commit here inside this particular test explorer, we can see we have this particular scenario which is getting it passed. Suppose you fail this particular step. Let's commit here in the go to step definitions. So we can say assert. So whenever you want to fail this assertion, we are going to use a fail method. So let's have a debug point here. So here we are going to have a debug point. Select this and say run in debug mode. Has opened this particular browser. It came it here inside the before scenario. Click on continue. The control has reached it here. Still the test error is null. So let's click on this continue again. So the control comes it here, and I provide a username. Right now we are purposely making this particular test step as a fail to test after step functionality. So let's click on continue. The control has reached it here, and if we hover a mouse, we can see right now it is not null. It means it is having some information. It is coming it right now as a blank, and we can see it is having a failed as well, which is this result state. So now if we click on continue, the control will commit here inside this particular block, and we can see it in this way. We can get the screenshots whenever any of the scenario step is getting it failed. We are going to get the screenshots, and we have reached it here inside the after test run as well. So we have a different hooks, one after test run, after feature, before test run, and we have other hooks related to after scenario, before step, after step as well. So if you talk about a test error, whenever you are executing a scenario, any of the error comes up, then this test error is going to get the result is not equal to null. Then we are going to take the screenshots, and we can attach the screenshot to the results. So we have these four hooks: before scenario, after scenario, before scenario, and after scenario will be executed whenever we are performing some actions related to a scenario. And we can use the before step and the after step. So this before step will be invoked before invoking any of the step of the scenario, and this after step will be executed after executing any step of the scenario. So that's it in this session.